Well, welcome everyone. I can't tell you what a thrill it is for me to be here and what a privilege it is to have been invited by Sally to come and speak at her conference. I've been following her work for about 10 years now, and fortunately she helped me overcome my fear of eating red meat and eggs and butter and so on, so I was able to carry on in terms of my own wellness path. I call this talk How to Fix a Broken Brain because that's essentially how I felt for many, many years of my life. I had debilitating chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivities through basically the 80s and 90s in particular. And I wish I knew then what I know now. The way that I can describe the way my brain felt, indeed, was that it was broken. I was walking around in an absolute brain fog. I had absolutely no memory. At that stage, I had 2 university degrees. I couldn't read a sentence on a book. I'd read that sentence over and over and over again. I could not remember what I was reading, and this was in my 20s. So I knew something was terribly wrong. A catalyst for me was that I had a terrible infection. I was living overseas at the time. I lived a year in France, a year in England, and the latter 6 months of my stay over there, I was living in a moldy apartment with black mold growing everywhere on the walls, in my clothes, and I was just very naive. I didn't understand how toxic black mold was. And after 6 months in that apartment, I absolutely collapsed. And basically stayed sick from there on in for many, many years. So I think really ultimately my major symptom was debilitating fatigue. I also had extremely debilitating insomnia. I can tell you for that 12 years I may have slept about 6 hours a week in some instances. I was not sleeping at all. I didn't understand what was wrong with me. And I was tenacious. I kept looking and looking and looking for answers. I was not going to give up. And I said to myself, come hell or high water, I'm going to find answers for people because nobody deserves to live like this. Nobody. And so I'm fortunate today I get to work with people who have debilitating conditions like chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, OCD, bipolar, et cetera, addiction issues as well. And I study their biochemistry. I teach them the nutritional principles I'm going to talk about today. Everybody I work with follows the Weston A. Price principles in terms of the nutrition, but I'm going to talk to you today about some of the specifics and why this nutrition is so important for balancing your nervous system. And we're hearing more and more about the broken brain. We're hearing so much in the media about what's wrong with our brains today. We're seeing so many issues with regards to everything from ADD, depression, anxiety, bipolar. We're hearing about Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, all sorts of issues in and around the brain. But I have to tell you, be cautious about what you're reading, because in any case that I see in the media where they're talking about the brain, they seem to ignore nutrition. Number one. And number two, they seem to always gear you towards medications. I can tell you depression is not a Prozac deficiency. ADD is not a Ritalin deficiency, okay? There's some very clear-cut biochemical imbalances that are going on in these conditions. And when I see cause and effect every day when I'm working with people, when they're doing my program, and I can see them start off, they can't even get out of bed in the morning, to being able to carry on a full-time job and go on and live a full life, I know that these conditions are reversible. It does take a lot of work and a tremendous amount of patience, but all that work and patience does pay off. So we're living in a mad, mad world. About 20% of the North American population is now on psychiatric drugs, either for depression, ADHD, anxiety, etc. North Americans consume multiple uppers and downers and mysterious mood stabilizers to the tune of $25 billion annually. And psychiatrists tell us that 46% of the American population now fit at least one of the criteria in their psychiatric manual, the DSM-4. So we're very mentally unstable today as a society, and none of these things, in my opinion, are normal. And what I like to do, because essentially I'm a layperson, I had to learn how to get well on my own. I do a lot of radio shows, and I like to say on the radio, guess what? I don't have any qualifications, but our ancestors didn't have any qualifications either. You shouldn't have to go to university to learn this information. We should all be privy to it. And I like to make things simple, and I like to talk about hypoglycemia and how really I think this is the fundamental reason why we are leading towards this bad mood epidemic, as Julia Ross likes to call it. And essentially, when we're on this blood sugar roller coaster ride, that makes us very vulnerable to bad mood. So to me, the key thing I do with people is I help them stabilize their blood sugar. And to me, what best stabilizes the blood sugar is going to be eating 3 square meals a day and having enough animal fat and animal protein in each meal. When I'm working with people who have debilitating depression, for example, chronic fatigue, a lot of people don't have an appetite. I say, regardless of whether or not you have an appetite, you need to eat those 3 square meals a day. I know it can be difficult when people don't have an appetite, but you must eat those 3 square meals a day in order to stabilize your blood sugar. Otherwise, you're going to see these mood changes, you're going to see all of these potential symptoms simply because of this roller coaster ride you might put yourself on. And this is from a textbook that I own that's from 1944. It's a medical textbook where even the doctors back then, before we became fat and cholesterol phobic, where doctors were saying that the diet should be 65 to 75% fat, 65 to 75% fat in order to basically control the blood sugar. You see, before World War II, we were much healthier then than we are now. And before World War II, we didn't have the food phobias then that we have today. So we didn't have red meat phobia, egg phobia, butter phobia, right? And we were actually very healthy. But doctors also knew that fat was really a key to stabilizing blood sugar. And after World War II, things all changed, didn't they? You're all learning here from Sally Fallon and so many of the other speakers. It was after World War II where we started switching more to the edible oils. And that's what not only destabilized our blood sugar levels, but also starved our nervous systems at the same time. So we got a double whammy after, in particular, World War II. The problem had already begun years earlier, but it was really very pronounced after World War II. And so what does that mean for the adrenal glands? Your adrenal glands I look to as your batteries, as your body's batteries. And when you're on this blood sugar roller coaster ride, what you're doing is you're stressing your adrenal glands at the same time because they're essentially a backup system to control blood sugar levels. In simple terms, that's one of their roles. Another one of their roles that I think very few people understand or know about, and I certainly didn't for the longest time, is that the adrenal glands are responsible for controlling your mineral balance. Now, under that umbrella, that also includes their ability to kick out heavy metals or excess metals from your body. And so when the adrenals are stressed, when they're working beyond their capacity, then what happens year after year after year of being stressed, this ability to control your minerals is certainly very compromised. And what happens is your minerals are your spark plugs. They help control many different systems in your body, including your neurotransmitters, your hormones, enzymes, etc. And so when minerals go out of balance, you lose your spark, right? You don't feel much spark. And we've got to get those minerals in balance so that you get your spark back. And that's not easy to do. That takes a tremendous amount of work to undo the damage from having weakened adrenal glands. My program takes about 2 years to help restore the adrenal glands. And that's why I said earlier it takes a tremendous amount of not just compliance, but a lot of patience as well. And I mentioned the 3 square meal model. Before World War II, essentially, we sat down and had no problem eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We ate every 5 hours through the course of the day. We didn't skip meals. We didn't wait too long in between meals as a general rule of thumb. Meals were homemade, and we didn't have the fat and cholesterol phobia. So we centered most of our calories around eating animal fat. So when people are giving a lot of dietary advice, I ask everybody, let's make it simple. We want to be healthy. We need to eat like healthy people. Before World War II, we were pretty healthy, still. And so what did we do? We ate 3 square meals a day. So I try and distill things down as much as I can for people because I know there's a lot of confusing information out there. And if you want to know whether or not your nutritional information is for real, you have to look to food history. You have to see how many generations were able to be healthy following whatever nutritional rules you might be listening to. So try and basically outline your day around this model of 3 square meals per day. Get about 70% of your calories, especially if you're of European descent, from animal fat. And try and minimize your carb consumption. And I use carbs. When I talk about carbs, I'm talking about everything from sugar to juice to vegetables and fruits and grain. We haven't been eating plant-based foods, huge amounts of it anyway, for a very long period of time. And when you overconsume plant-based foods, in simple terms, that's what dysregulates your blood sugar. So you don't want to overconsume too many plant-based foods. So when we look at our history, over 99% of our history, we were hunter-gatherers. We only invented agriculture about 10,000 years ago. And so with the last ice age ending about 12,500 years ago, we didn't have greenhouses back then. So we couldn't have eaten a lot of plant-based foods. And when archaeologists, for example, studied before pre-agriculture, when they looked at the bones of our ancestors, our very, very distant ancestors, they didn't see cavities. They saw very healthy people. They were short, or what happened was they were about 6 inches taller, I should say, when we were hunter-gatherers. We actually shrank in stature after we invented agriculture 10,000 years ago. Our lifespans decreased from about 26 years to 19 years, and that's when you start to see cavities, osteoporosis, anemia, infectious diseases arise, is after we invented agriculture. And so what did we do when we invented agriculture? We started to displace the animal foods and replace them with more plant-based foods. And then so that was about 10,000 years ago. And then another assault to our food supply occurred in the early 1800s, post-industrial revolution, when we invented the steel mill and we saw the centralization of the flour industry. So we started consuming more breads and cookies and crackers and so on. And then another assault to our food supply occurred in the middle 1800s with the invention of the canning industry. So again, more plant-based foods in the diet. And at the end of the 1800s, you start to see the rise of the junk food industry, and that would be things like Cracker Jack, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, etc. And then in 1909, of course, as you're all learning, the invention of hydrogenation. So we see this systematic assault to our food supply before even Dr. Weston A. Price started to do his research. But the biggest assault to our food supply occurred after World War II. And that's when you start to see the fat and cholesterol phobia start to surface. That's when you start to see tens of thousands of foods lining the middle aisles of our grocery store. In fact, today when you go into a grocery store, these aisles in the middle of a grocery store block our view from even seeing the real food that's at the back of the grocery store. I like to tell people, imagine in the 1800s when you would have, or imagine the Little House on the Prairie, imagine the general store in that series. Was there a lot of food in that general store? No. Why? Because most of us were producing a lot of our own food, or we were going to our neighbors to get their food, but we didn't, we were eating the nutrient-dense foods very gladly in the 1800s still. So even back then, yes, we were still pretty healthy. Because we were eating real food. We were eating the way our ancestors ate. But after World War II, because we had invented ways to stabilize food so they can stay on the shelf, that's when we started displacing the nutrient-dense foods even more and replacing them with more nutrient-deficient foods. And so what we've seen since World War II, of course, is the rise in not just more chronic disease, but more mental disorders as well. And I mentioned Dr. Weston A. Price. I don't think I need to go into a lot of detail. I think most of you already are very familiar with his work. I'm a Canadian. He was a Canadian, so I have to mention that as my Canadiana pride here. But at any rate, he did emigrate to the United States, and in the 1930s, as you know, he started to see the physical degeneration occur in his pediatric patients that he had. But what was interesting is he knew there was something wrong because he was treating the parents of these children. And the parents had a fantastic dental health, but in one generation there was a dramatic change going on in the health of the dental health of the children. So when he set out around the world to study primitive diets, he started to see changes in people's overall health, their dental health, if they displaced their traditional foods and replaced them with the more modernized, industrialized foods. And of course, as you know, this is one of the main observations that he made. What was it about these primitive cultures where they stayed on their traditional diets? What was it about their diet that made them so incredibly healthy? And it was that they had significantly more calcium and other minerals in their diet, and 10 times the fat-soluble vitamins as the modern American diet. And it's probably, this was back when he was doing the research, it's probably much more, there's probably much more disparity there today. And just an overview, just in case somebody is new to the work of Dr. Weston A. Price, here's just one example. Off the coast of Scotland, these two brothers, you can see the one brother, he stayed on the primitive diet, he had excellent dental health, whereas the other brother had started integrating white bread, jam, highly sweetened coffee, and sweet chocolates in his diet. And his father told Dr. Price with deep concern how difficult it was for this boy to get up in the morning and go to work. And so I don't know if you can see the dental health of what probably is the younger brother compared to the older brother. I don't know if you can actually see that in the picture very well. But what is most remarkable to me is this notion that his psychological state is being affected. And I know when I was getting sick, when I wasn't reading the signs, of course, when I was getting sick and leading towards disabling chronic fatigue, but getting up in the morning became more and more difficult for me before I actually finally had my last straw and collapsed. And this to me is a big warning sign, I have to tell you. When I have people say to me, "Oh, Johnny couldn't get out of bed in the morning, isn't that cute?" I'm sorry, that's not cute. It is natural and normal for a child to be excited about the day, to jump out of bed, enthusiastic about going to school and learning, being respectful of their elders, and just, being there as a child and living a normal life as a child. And that normal child's life is being taken away from our children. I have a friend who works for the school system where I live in London, Ontario. And she's a secretary and works in the front office. And she says, "Pam, you wouldn't believe how many children are lined up out of the office to get late slips in the morning. And every one of them, the excuse that they give is that they cannot get out of bed in the morning." And that was not the case, of course, when I was younger. I think for most of you, you remember it was just so taboo to be late for school, wasn't it? But it's turning into the norm because these kids are just too exhausted to get out of bed. So you already see the signs of dysregulated blood sugar control and adrenal stress. You're already seeing those signs at very young ages today. And nobody's heeding that. Nobody's doing anything about it or talking about it. They think it's cute and they think it's normal. And of course, what are these children eating? Well, they're not eating nutrient-dense foods. They're eating a lot of processed foods. And even the World Health Organization in 2003, they published this report and said, essentially, that it's processed foods that are causing chronic disease. Diseases like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and along with obesity, there are probably at least 40 health conditions associated with that. So here we have the World Health Organization warning us about processed foods. As a knee-jerk reaction to this report, the investment bankers took note. And they said, if we're that sick, how are we going to have any investors? How's anybody going to go to work? How are these companies going to be able to have the cogs in the wheel turning, right? Our government, what are we going to do with all these sick people? Government's going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger to be able to take care of all these people who are too depressed and too tired to go to work. And of course, if they're not making money, they can't invest in companies. So we see a big problem on our hand. We see our system as being completely unsustainable as long as we're as sick as we are. So the investment bankers wrote another report in response to this report. And I hope to see that, I hope we can see some cooperation eventually with the corporate world, because they're going to go away as long as the masses are as sick as we are. Even the military is saying, something's really wrong. We can't find soldiers that are healthy enough to be in the army. So a former Surgeon General of the United States is vocal, and he's coming out talking about this crisis that we have on our hands. So as long as we're not getting the correct information about how to undo the damage, that's associated with eating all these nutrient-deficient foods, unfortunately, the problem is going to be hard to turn around. So that's why we're so fortunate to have Sally Fallon and the Weston A. Price Foundation, so that we can get the correct information to turn this situation around. And here we see, according to the British Journal of Psychiatry, eating a diet high in processed foods increases the risk of depression. Dr. Andrew McCullough, Chief Executive of the Mental Health Foundation, said this study adds to an existing body of solid research that shows the strong links between what we eat and our mental health. And the sad thing is when I talk to people who have debilitating depression, chronic fatigue, etc., and they go to their doctor and they say, what can I do nutritionally to help support my mental health? Chances are the doctor's not going to say anything about nutrition, because unfortunately they haven't been taught nutrition in medical school, and what they're going to get is a drug, and the drug isn't solving the underlying problems that are causing their depression or fatigue or what have you. So we need more and more medical schools to come on board and learn how to learn about proper nutrition, because right now what we're seeing, of course, is more and more information coming forward, even from psychiatrists who are saying, we've got to stop handing these drugs out like candy. They're just not working. They will work in some individuals, but even if they are working, some of the side effects are so debilitating that people get very uncomfortable and come off the drugs. And I think that it's about 70% of the people struggling with depression, it's about 70%, that walk around suffering in silence. They don't come forward and do or say anything about it. And the reason why is because of the shame and the guilt associated with things like depression and addiction. These are the elephants in the room. But I think we have to talk about these conditions. I mean, depression is currently our #1 cause of disability here in North America. It's costing us billions of dollars. Hopes, lives, dreams. I mean, people are losing their opportunity to live a full life, and nobody deserves that. So we have to work together, I think, because the pharmaceutical company has so much control. But we have to work together, I think, as a grassroots effort to undo this and get people the help that they need, because these conditions are definitely reversible. So this is just a cartoon with 2 school children. Trade you some Cheetos and a Ritalin for your cupcake and a Zoloft. It takes an extraordinary intelligence to contemplate the obvious, Alfred North Whitehead. I have a book, it's 100 years old, it's called School Feeding. And the woman who wrote the book at the time was considered an expert worldwide on how to feed children at schools. And 100 years ago, they used to take children who had behavior and learning problems, they take them out of the schools and put them in special schools, not to discipline them, but to feed them. And what these kids would get for about 3 months at these special schools is they'd get lots of meat and butter in their diets. And then they would see their behaviors improve, and they would go back to the regular schools. But what they noted was that these children who weren't eating the nutrient-dense foods were generally people who came from low socioeconomic groups. So they were eating, instead of meat and butter, they were eating, say, canned vegetables and margarine or what have you. So they weren't really getting the nutrient-dense foods, and they could see their behaviors in the schools and how it was associated to malnutrition. So unfortunately, they knew more about nutrition 100 years ago than we know today. So I just want to point out some graphs here showing in our recent history that we have indeed been listening to the dietary dictocrats, as Sally likes to call them. We have indeed been increasing our consumption in grain, and as I mentioned to you earlier, to me carbohydrates are grains, fruits, vegetables, juice, sugar. I mean, these are all sources of sugar. So here we see we've been increasing our grain consumption, increasing our sugar consumption. Even fruits and vegetables we've been increasing, and is it working for us? No, because as we've been increasing these foods, we're ignoring and still phobic of eating the fats and the cholesterol. And here we see another chart showing that we've faithfully been increasing our consumption of carbohydrates, decreasing our consumption of fat and protein. And of course, this is leading to obesity, because if you know the work of Gary Taubes, it's carbohydrates that drive insulin, insulin that drives fat. But it's not just causing obesity, it's starving our brains to eat like this. And so we're seeing a multitude of symptoms, illnesses surfacing because of this dietary shift in our lives today. And geneticists will tell you that it takes anywhere from 10,000 to 40,000 years for our bodies to adjust, to adapt. You know, I was naive. When I got sick, I became a vegetarian, a vegan. And I thought it was going to help me get better. I didn't realize, you know, my ancestors ate about 70% of their calories from animal fat. How could I possibly think I could be healthy by reducing my consumption, eliminating animal fat from my diet in one generation and be healthy for it? No way. No way. You know, it takes a long time for our bodies to adjust. And on this low-fat diet that we've seen surface in recent history, clearly it's not working for us. And this is just some citations I have from my book, that some research that has been done showing the problems with a low-fat diet. Children on low-fat diets suffer from growth problems and failure to thrive. A low-fat diet is associated with greater feelings of depression, dejection, and anger. In contrast, a high-fat diet is associated with improvements in mood. A low-fat diet is associated with a significant increase in deaths from accidents and suicides and violence. A low-fat diet may impair cognitive function. Depressed individuals tend to consume more carbohydrates in their diet than non-depressed individuals. And research shows that eating adequate amounts of complete protein can increase alertness. So, and I think when people eat enough, when I have classes and I'm teaching the work of Weston Price, and people go home, start eating more animal fat in the diet, invariably a day or 2 or 3 days go by and I get an email from them and they say, I feel better. I started to feel better already. And I'm like, great, that's fantastic. So it just goes to show you how quickly people can improve just by going back to the way we used to eat. And here's just even from the American government saying a diet low in animal fat, or the typical what we know as the low-fat diet, is associated with lower levels of calcium, zinc, magnesium, iron, phosphorus, vitamin E, vitamin D, vitamin A, vitamin B12, vitamin B6, folic acid, and niacin. And what's interesting about a lot of these nutrients is that they're crucial for the production of neurotransmitters. So, you know, we're losing the nutrients that we need in order to keep our mental stability. And I mentioned earlier, I'm of European descent, so my ancestors would have very gladly consumed about 70% of their calories from animal fat. One of my favorite books is Life Without Bread by Dr. Wolfgang Lutz. And he, as a physician for 40 years, would put people on essentially this formula. 70% fat in their diet, 20% protein, 10% carbohydrates, which amounts to about 72 grams of carbohydrates per day. For 40 years he did this. He just passed away, I think, a couple of years ago in his ripe old age I think he was 92 or something like that. And I think he was a board member, if I'm not mistaken, for the Weston A. Price Foundation. But as a medical doctor, giving this formula to his patients, he saw nothing but good things come out of it. Nothing but good things. His patients used to get very, very healthy following this particular path. So what does 72 grams of carbohydrates look like? Oh, I went to the end, sorry. Hang on. I pressed the wrong button. I'll just show you what 72 grams might look like. Here we go. It's not very difficult, and you can actually count carbohydrates. You can go to several websites. This is just one that I cite here, but there are several websites you can go to that help give you an idea of what that carbohydrate count might look like. This is just random food items I put on this slide. And of course, if you're eating sourdough bread or peas or potato or broccoli, you want to pound on the butter, of course. These are all just great excuses to eat more butter. All 6 items together represent about 12 grams each. 6 times 12, 72. So I use this formula with my clients simply because I'm working with a lot of carbivores. I'm working with a lot of people who are very addicted to carbohydrates. Because carbohydrates, if you overconsume them, you get all that sugar, you know what? You're probably getting a good buzz from it, right? So you want to stabilize your blood sugar. You overconsume carbohydrates, of course, it's going to dysregulate your blood sugar. And so some carbohydrates in the diet are great because, you know, when you look at fruits and vegetables, for example, especially the dark leafy greens and the berries like blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, they're loaded in antioxidants. And what are these antioxidants good for? They're good to help preserve those wonderful animal fats that you're eating. I'm not a big fan of medicinal fiber because our guts are simply not designed for a lot of fiber in the diet. Our guts are designed for fat and protein. So I'm not necessarily pushing the carbohydrates for the fiber, but you will get some fiber in that, but it's not going to be too much. It's not going to irritate your lining of the gut. So we are fat heads. About 60% of our brain is made up of fat. 25% of that fat is the omega-3 fatty acid DHA, while 14% is the omega-6 fatty acid arachidonic acid, which is a fatty acid. Arachidonic acid is, in the scientific community a fatty acid that is largely demonized. And I think if you've been listening to Sally and Chris Masterjohn, I hope they've rested your minds at ease over this fat. It's a very good fat, very healthy fat. But when you think about animal fats, you're thinking about a conglomeration of nutrients that are together in the fat. You're not just going to get the DHA, the vitamin A, the cholesterol. You know, you're getting everything in there together. It's a harmonious kind of dance that's going on in those animal fats. So when you take in dietary cholesterol, you're going to also have the vitamin A in there to help with the conversion of your hormones. So when people unfortunately reduce animal fat in their diet, by default they're reducing cholesterol, they're reducing vitamin A in their diet, so they're going to compromise the production of their hormones, aren't they? And I'm happy to say that nutritional medicine is now acknowledging the importance of cholesterol, as any field. I mean, we're all guilty of it, basically. Most of us, anyway, are guilty of having been cholesterol phobic. Nutritional medicine was cholesterol phobic. I'm starting to see this turn around now, thanks, I think, largely to the work of the Weston A. Price Foundation. So this is a very new book that came out, Medicine, Treatments, and Psychiatry, 2012. This is just one excerpt from the book where it jumped out at me because I was pleased that they were acknowledging cholesterol. Here, what they're saying is low cholesterol is commonly overlooked as a contributing factor for anxiety or depression. Cholesterol is needed to modulate serotonin transporter activity in cellular membranes. Low cholesterol is linked to violent deaths, example, suicides and accidents. Men with chronically low cholesterol levels show consistently higher risk of having depressive symptoms. In healthy young adult women, low cholesterol is inversely associated with trait measures of depression and anxiety. And this is from Chris Masterjohn. Again, you see here he is acknowledging vitamin A, D, and arachidonic acid together, working to help regulate your emotions, to regulate anxiety, depression, and motivation. So that's why I tell my clients the best foods for your adrenal glands, for your nervous system as a whole, the best foods are going to be things like butter and cod liver oil, red meat, egg yolks. Arachidonic acid is one of the most abundant fatty acids in the brain. It serves many important purposes. Deficiencies of arachidonic acid can lead to several health complications. Patients with autism, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and depression show low levels of arachidonic acid in their bodies and could be worsened by eating a diet low in animal fat. Individuals with ADHD have significantly lower levels of both arachidonic acid and DHA. Alcoholics are deficient in DHA and arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid increases sleep quality during the night and increases energy during the day. These are just some citations from my book, Addiction, the Hidden Epidemic. So let's take a look, just as an example, where might you find arachidonic acid? You're going to find it in red meat and butter, but also egg yolks, organ meats. And I know all of you are getting over any issues around these foods, fortunately. And of course, this is from Sally. And if you've sat through her seminars, you know that the foods that are highlighted in red, which are going to give us the richest nutrients that we need in order to support our overall health, the liver, the organ meats, the eggs, the butter, the cream, etc. These are the foods that our dietary dictocrats are telling us not to eat. But they're the foods that our bodies desperately need. This is from Gary Taub's book, Good Calories, Bad Calories. One French account from 1793 estimated that Americans ate 8 times as much meat as bread. By one USDA estimate, the typical American was eating 178 pounds of meat annually in the 1830s, 40 to 60 pounds more than was reportedly being eaten a century later. And these, of course, are the foods that are extremely familiar to us. They're delicious foods. There's nothing to be afraid about, but they're the ones that I feel are the ones that are going to be the most stabilizing for our nervous system. Cod liver oil. A recent study in Norway found that the longer a person had been supplementing with cod liver oil, the less likely they were to be depressed. The connection between depression and vitamin D deficiency, which vitamin D, as you know, is in the cod liver oil, is well established. Adequate levels of vitamin A must also be present in the thyroid gland in order to absorb enough iodine, upon which it depends for proper function. So all of my clients, I don't put them on fish oil, I put them on cod liver oil. And it's because I want them to get some extra vitamin A and vitamin D. Vitamin D plays a role in the conversion of the amino acids into neurotransmitters, tryptophan into serotonin, and tyrosine into dopamine and norepinephrine. So we need to make sure we're getting enough vitamin D, not just from the sun, but we must be getting it from the food as well. Now, here's a big, long, fancy word, homocysteine. I'm going to break things down. There's books, lots of long books written on homocysteine. But I'm going to try and give you the absolute Reader's Digest version right here, right now. So since 1990, thousands of scientific studies have been published showing that homocysteine is a significant risk factor for several diseases, including heart disease, depression, chronic fatigue, cognitive decline, etc., Alzheimer's, okay? Homocysteine is an amino acid, okay? When the body has adequate amounts of vitamins B6, B12, folic acid, homocysteine is detoxified. So you can control the homocysteine in your body by making sure you're getting enough of these particular B vitamins. When you go to the health food store, it's very common to see homocysteine formulas, and they are comprised of these, in particular, these three B vitamins, perhaps a few other ingredients, but it's really to control the homocysteine to keep it low, okay? Methylation, and this all ties together. I'm going to tie homocysteine with methylation. Methylation is a process that helps to make, break down, and balance neurotransmitters, build nerve cells, and protect your brain from damage, even slowing down the aging process. But when homocysteine is high, it can interfere with the methylation process. So it's going to interfere essentially with the production of your neurotransmitters. So in order to protect your mental well-being, it's crucial you maintain your low level of homocysteine. You're following me so far? Right? You want to keep homocysteine down so you don't mess with your methylation process in your brain. And that methylation you want to be able to be working properly so your neurotransmitters are working properly. Right? So where do you get B6, B12, and folic acid? Right? You're going to get those nutrients. They're best found in animal foods. What have we been doing for the last 100 years? We've been reducing our consumption of animal foods. So we're not getting enough of these key B vitamins in our diet to be able to keep homocysteine down and therefore make sure that methylation is working properly in our brains. Okay? And vitamin B6, B12, folic acid, if you look at vitamin studies, you'll see that they're commonly there in research looking at their effects on depression. Where are you going to get these? Okay, just an example. These are from Amanda Rose's website, just some ideas as to the nutrient content of lamb, beef, salmon. We're going to get these B vitamins mostly from foods like lamb, beef, salmon, red meat, etc., or even chicken, for example. We want to get enough animal foods in the diet to make sure we're getting enough of these B vitamins. In particular, things like liver as well, because the organ meats, of course, are going to be very, very high in the B vitamins. But let's talk about the connection, though, making sure you're getting enough dietary cholesterol, making sure you're getting enough animal fat in the diet, and what that means for the minerals, because your minerals are your spark plugs, and we want to make sure that they're in balance. Not just in terms of the levels of the minerals, but it's the ratio of the minerals that is crucial in terms of your thyroid being able to work properly, your adrenals to be able to work properly, for you to be able to control blood sugar levels properly. It's the ratios as well. And that's what the adrenal glands are doing, is they're controlling both the levels and the ratios of your minerals. So minerals affect emotions and behavior. They are associated with specific neurotransmitters, and some settle in specific parts of the brain. Imbalance in minerals can contribute to feelings of resentment, frustration, anger, irritability, hostility, moodiness, depression, insomnia, fatigue, guilt feelings, preoccupations, panic attacks, or emotional sensitivities. Minerals can regulate cell membrane function and neuronal excitability. And a lot of metals, excess metals, heavy metals, love to lodge in the brain. So you can produce all the neurotransmitters you want, but if your body's got trapped metals like copper in the brain, copper is, for example, a very highly conductive metal, and it can really cause these neurotransmitters to misfire. So excess copper in the brain can alter the balance of dopamine and norepinephrine, two mood-regulating chemicals. And copper has an adverse effect on methylation. So yet another thing that comes into play in terms of messing with methylation, the methylation process in your brain. And what is causing, one of the key things I see with individuals with mood disorders, with addiction issues, is copper toxicity. Why is copper so prevalent today? It's because, I think, largely because of the red meat phobia. Red meat is one of the best sources of zinc. It's not going to be eggs or dairy. Eggs and dairy are a good source of zinc, but they're not a great source of zinc. A better source of zinc is going to be red meat. I think red meat is completely underrated in terms of the nutritional value within. I think we haven't even hit the tip of the iceberg yet to find out what qualities are in red meat that help stabilize our mood. When I get people to start increasing their consumption of red meat, and they come back to me and they tell me they're feeling better mentally, emotionally, I think there's things in there we just don't even know about. But red meat, of course, is going to have other things in there like CoQ10, carnosine, carnitine, all things that are involved in giving you more energy as well. But when you've reduced your consumption of red meat in the diet, you're not going to get enough zinc that is going to counteract the effects of increasing copper, right? So zinc and copper are antagonistic. So if you're not getting enough zinc in the diet, copper is going to start rising. And another assault, I think, where we're getting too much copper is that city water can add copper sulfate to the city water supply as an antifungal. If you have copper pipes, that's an extra way you can get copper. And if you have artificial water fluoridation in your town, that's from hydrofluorosilicic acid. The fluoride ion is a very, it loves to attract to things like copper and even lead and other metals. It's a very reactive ion, and it will pull more copper off those copper pipes as well. So you're going to even get more exposure to copper if you're drinking city water that is fluoridated. And if you swim a lot, if you're in hot tubs and swimming pools, they also may be a source of extra copper. And this is just an example. This is just one snippet from a lab result that I might get when I do hair analysis on people. Hair analysis, I used to think was foo-foo stuff. I thought it was nothing, especially back when I was sick. I heard about hair analysis and I really thought there was nothing to it. I'm really fortunate to be able to use this program that I have and use the lab that I use because not only because they've taught me how to properly interpret these tests, but also because I use a very specific set of supplements to undo the damage from this mineral imbalance that so many of us are experiencing today. When I do a first test on somebody, I may not even see the copper. I may not see that copper until the third or the fourth test. Because as I mentioned earlier, the adrenal glands are controlling the level and ratio of your minerals. And when the adrenals are weak, then these metals can be sequestered deep in your tissue, and you may not see them until your adrenal glands have more vitality. And so in some individuals, I may not see this kind of copper for a year into working with somebody. And it's a real process to be able to get rid of that copper. But when I see copper that high, I know I'm going to expect that this is associated with depression, fatigue, addiction, etc. A lot of mood issues in and around this copper. This is a very, very high level of copper in this individual. And I don't have time to explain the rest of the minerals, but I will tell you that when I'm working with people and I'm putting them on my program for a 2-year stint, my goal is to get the minerals across the page where that ideal line is. I don't know if you can see it from where you're sitting, but there's a line across the page which is the ideal. And what I have to do is I have to balance the calcium and the magnesium, the sodium and the potassium. And as those 4 minerals in particular are balanced out, then typically the rest of the minerals fall into place. I don't have to guess what supplements people need. I can tell what supplements they need by looking at their biochemistry. And as they gain more vitality, as the adrenal glands get stronger and stronger and stronger and their biochemistry changes, I have to match their biochemical changes to the protocol. So there's always going to be changes to an individual's protocol as they get stronger and stronger and stronger. But I'm not just looking at the levels, I'm also considering the ratios. One real secret to the work that I do has to do with fixing the mineral ratios. And that's a very difficult process, but I tell my clients, I say, if you follow this program, you will save money, you will save time, and you will save grief. Because the formulas that I use are very specific to fixing the minerals. And it is just wonderful. I work with people who are on disability, who are on welfare. They can afford this program. It's not expensive, as long as they do it. It's just a lot of work. My clients all have to sign a contract before they work with me, because it's so much work. In 3 months, they're not going to be better. In 6 months, they're not going to be better. They need to come in and work with Sergeant Pam for about 2 years. And so the one key thing that I must do with individuals is I have to target the digestion. And I have to tell you, it's very difficult to get the digestion back up and running. And you know that your gut is your second brain, and how important the gut is in terms of assimilating nutrients and so on. But let me tell you something with regards to biochemistry and how that relates to the gut and why you must be so patient to get well. When I'm working with people who have low zinc and low sodium like this, for example, you need these minerals in order to produce hydrochloric acid. And you need hydrochloric acid. You need your gut to be as acidic as stomach acid. So you break down those wonderful proteins into amino acids to fuel your neurotransmitters, right? And when your gut is acidic enough and the stomach contents come out of your stomach into your duodenum, the upper part of your of your small intestine, then what happens is if the stomach contents are acidic enough, that triggers the release of bile. Right? So you have a pH coming out of the stomach that's very acidic, probably 2 or 3. And the bile is about an 8 or 9 pH. So the bile has to come in on the scene to neutralize some of that acid so it doesn't burn all the way going down through your GI tract. So when the stomach isn't producing as much hydrochloric acid as it should be, when the chyme isn't as acidic as it should be, bile gets very sluggish. In essence, what I'm working with is people where the bodies have forgotten how to digest animal fat and animal protein. And it takes a while for the body to come back into play to be able to break down these wonderful traditional foods. So when the stomach contents come down into the upper part of the small intestine, that's the site absorption of minerals, including calcium, iron, zinc, and magnesium, but also the long-chain fatty acids and the fat-soluble vitamins. So that's where a lot of the action happens. That's where you're going to be absorbing minerals. That's where you're going to be absorbing vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K2, right? But if there's a mechanical breakdown in this region of your gut, unfortunately, there's going to be malabsorption issues. Now, when I'm working with people where I know they're not producing enough hydrochloric acid, we need to support the digestion with as much acidic foods as possible. So this would be things like raw sauerkraut, pickles, kefir, yogurt. Those types of things need to come in on the scene in order to almost retrain the gut to be acidic, to help support the breakdown of the animal fat. I also have to use a lot of support to get the bile production up. When the bile has been essentially dormant or not working properly for so many years, and it gets thick and sluggish, by the way, it can actually form gallstones in the bile duct system. So even if we're producing the bile, and by the way, you should be producing about 1 liter of bile a day possibly, when the gallstones are trapped in the bile duct system, even if you do produce bile, it doesn't necessarily come down into the duodenum to do its job, right? So you can see the problems that will ensue with gallstones. So if my clients are brave enough, they do the liver gallbladder flush to try and blast out the gallstones. I don't have a lot of time to talk about the liver gallbladder flush, but it's easy enough to find that information. So there's lots of things people can do to help support bile production, and by doing things like apple cider vinegar, for example, taurine. You take your bitters and things like that. That can also be very helpful for supporting the liver and the gallbladder. But it's very difficult to do this without fixing the sodium and the zinc. And when you see sodium and the potassium down like that, you know they have adrenal burnout. And essentially what that means is as long as the adrenals are weak, digestion is going to be weak. Okay? So it's it's quite complex. What else do I want to say about this? Because this is something I think that a lot of people have a lot of misinformation on. A lot of people would take things like hydrochloric acid, and I don't mind that as a stopgap measure, but it's not solving the reason why you're not producing enough hydrochloric acid in the first place. It's true that as we age, we slow down our production of hydrochloric acid, but we must compensate. We must always be aware of what we need to in order to assist the acidity of the gut, and we know the foods that we need to eat to do that. But it's quite a complicated process through here. So another thing, the reason why bile is so important is because when bile is backed up, when it's not producing itself properly, bile is essential for the peristalsis in your gut to take place. So if you're constipated, it's not a fiber deficiency probably, it's that you're just not producing enough bile to trigger peristalsis so that you can have healthy bowel movements. So to boost bile production, I mentioned a couple of supplements you could take, but coffee enemas are fabulous for boosting bile production. And when people are on my program and I'm stirring up a hornet's nest by allowing the release of metals, then what they have to do is not just come out of where they're sequestered in your body, but they have to come out of your body too. They have to find an exit route. So I instruct my clients to do coffee enemas as well, so that we can escort those heavy metals out through the bile. But also, as the adrenals are getting stronger, what's happening is the adrenals, as I mentioned, are responsible for kicking out the excess metals. And there's a protein called metallothionein, and is required for the regulation of metals. It basically grabs onto metals and carries them out of the body. And zinc is required for the metallothionein formation. So when you're not eating enough red meat, when zinc is being pushed down, when there's too much copper in the way, of course, then this process of escorting out the metals is also compromised by reducing the ability for the body to produce this metallothionein. And as I mentioned, to me, in my opinion, according to the research, zinc to me is the best way to get, or red meat is the best way to get zinc. When the body is deficient in zinc, it cannot utilize vitamin B6. Therefore, a zinc deficiency may also cause depression and insomnia. By avoiding beef, you are over 7 times more likely to suffer a zinc deficiency. And here's some recent research. I think this was out of Australia. Red meat halves the risk of depression. The interesting thing about this research is that the researchers went into this thinking that they would find the opposite results, and they didn't. They found out that red meat helped with depression. Women who reduce lamb and beef in their diets are more likely to suffer depression, according to this new study. People who avoid red meat are at an increased risk of clinical depression. And I see that all the time. The World Health Organization says that depression is currently, and this is a little bit dated, this is from 1996. At the time, depression was the 4th leading cause of disability worldwide. By 2020, they're estimating that depression will be the 2nd leading cause of disability worldwide. So we have a tsunami on our hands here. Why isn't anybody talking about it? And if they are talking about it, it's just drugs is the answer. Right? In my book, Addiction, the Hidden Epidemic, I talk about Aldous Huxley and his book, Brave New World, and how he basically foreshadowed what we're dealing with today. He didn't necessarily know about the nutritional element, but in the novel, he talks about the society and how everyone is on this fictitious drug named Soma. And it was to control them, right? And over 50% of the people in the United States are on some sort of prescription medication. Now, that doesn't mean they're all on mood drugs, but there's a lot of medications being handed out today to control people's moods. And like I mentioned earlier, the side effects of these drugs are probably worse than the symptoms that they had prior to being given that prescription. So I just think that there's too much at stake here. In terms of research that came out in 2005, they're saying doctors are in Canada, and I think this was another study from another area of the world, but the doctors in Ontario said that they fear children may not live as long as their parents. And so they're addressing the chronic illness issue here, but I'm saying the mental instability is definitely there. That when children are so mentally unstable today, and the teachers in my city, the Board of Education in I think it was last year, said that over 25% of the children have some sort of mental disorder. Over 25%. And I'm saying to myself, well, if these kids are being put on Ritalin or other drugs in their teens or earlier, what do they need in their 20s? What are they going to need in their 30s? What are they going to need in their 40s? Are they going to be able to have the mental fortitude to take care of their parents as they age? What is going to happen to society if our children are that unstable? And a lot of these kids, all they have the energy to do is play video games. They don't have necessarily the energy or the mental capacity to carry a full-time job, to go to university. Right? It's turning into a real crisis. So in summary, what I'm suggesting is to return to eating 3 square meals a day, because when we ate 3 square meals a day, we were healthier, both mentally and physically. Try not to keep things too complicated. And let's see. Oh, shoot. I keep pressing the wrong button here. But my book, Addiction: The Hidden Epidemic, I wrote as a call to action. This book is a call to action. I'm saying, we need to work together to solve this problem. I do classes and I say, let me change the title of the class. Let me call the class How to Fix a Broken Brain. Let me call the class Nutritional Help for ADD, ADHD. I hardly get anybody coming to my class when I address ADD and ADHD. I hardly get any parents there. Why? Yeah, I know people are pretty busy today, but guess what? Ritalin is a silver bullet. It calms those kids down. It's a great babysitter, right? They're satisfied. They get results when they give the kids Ritalin. But you know what? You're here because you want more for your kids. You want to, make sure your kids are getting the proper nutrients and don't have any long lifetime problems. But a lot of parents that are out there today don't know that there are choices. They just think that the Ritalin is what they need in order to keep their sanity together, to keep their family together, to keep their marriages together, to calm their children down so that they're not bouncing off the walls. And they don't necessarily know about the nutritional component, which is tragic to me. So I have a section in my book for children because I think that, obviously more needs to be done. And if you wanted to hear more about my radio shows, I post them on my website, so feel free to go to my website to listen to some of my radio shows. And the Healthy Mouth Summit is going to happen in January, and I'm going to talk about the role of copper in dental health as well. So copper plays a role in our mental health and our dental health. So I'll be talking about that in January online for the Healthy Mouth Summit. So thank you so much. I think I have time. I have time for questions. I have lots of time. Great, I have lots of time for questions, which I'm happy about.